Yes, he did.
You don't know what fair is. You can't make it.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Happy Cinco de Mayo. Lots to talk about. Let's meet the panelists. Sitting in for Wendy Weiss, Sarah Fenske from St. Louis Public Radio, Mr. Bill McClellan from the Post-Dispatch, Ray Hartmann from the Big 550 KTRS, rawstory.com, as well as the Front Times, which he founded. And there's Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American. We're going to kick off this Cinco de Mayo with you, Alvin, and the Convention Center. Maybe someday there will be conventions from Mexico and beyond coming to downtown St. Louis if that convention center is expanded. That's the hopes of Kitty Radcliffe, who heads up Explore St. Louis. However, something unusual happened this week when Richard Bradley, the head of public service for the city of St. Louis, asked how many bids there were for the second phase. It's a $70 million project to expand the convention center. He was told 0. And he said, let me just get this right. There were no bids to expand the convention center? What the heck, Alvin, is going on?
I'm sorry to bust out laughing, but that's kind of how I was when I first saw that, like, no bids. Okay, first of all right, my youngest daughter at University of Missouri, shortly more than a year from now, she will have her engineering degree. And I think, McClellan Reid and Blaine Reid could, put together a bid for $75 million.
I think we can be under that.
I mean, seriously, nobody out there put forth a bid? Because keep in mind, couldn't you bid, like, really, like, high or whatever, and just then negotiate? And it's your project.
And don't forget, the first half of the project came in 50% overbid, and there was just one bidder, Ray.
Yeah. Free money.
You look at me for
I thought you had an answer to this.
I did. I've talked to a couple people. I don't know if I want to try to give an answer. First, it's the city manages this project. The first bid, which ended up being a one-bid thing, is they're breaking ground like next week or something. So the main project going forward. My understanding is that this happens as a national problem. That this is not, for once, it's not a St. Louis thing. I mean, the old courthouse had the same situation where there was a project recently and there were no bids on the first round. It's apparently got to do with the costs are going up dramatically in terms of inflation because of COVID and because of the supply chain. And what happens is the city, and it's really not the city's fault, the City Public Service Board puts these out months ahead of time, and in the interim, that the cost, the economy changed so much and the costs changed so much that they lost the audience, basically, which doesn't mean it's dead. It just means you have to rebid it. But I will say this, I don't share the view that the CVC has, for example, to blame it all on rid of her days. They're blaming a lot of it on the delays to the county. I think she did what she played her role fine, and I happen to think she was in the right. But having said that, that's all I'm saying.
There's construction going on everywhere.
I know.
I mean, in St. Louis, everywhere around the country. The idea that, well, we can't get a single person to bid on this because it's a nationwide problem. It can't be. There's construction going on everywhere.
But that's almost part of the problem. There is a huge labor shortage right now in the skilled trades. These contractors cannot find enough people to staff these jobs. And so now that these cost estimates are out of date, as Ray's saying, it's an even bigger problem.
I'm the first one who likes to jump on the city for being in conflict.
I'm not jumping on anybody. I'm just saying, I don't get it.
I think if the people to ask are the contractors who voted with their feet.
Okay, but does this mean that the second half is going to be much more expensive because of supply chain issues? And we know that the first one was supposed to be $80 million. Now it's $124 million. Does this mean that Rita Days' North County Recplex is dead because the only way it gets money is if there's extra money after the convention center?
Well, it's slowed down just like the whole project is. And then that's all I'm saying is that, okay, labor shortage, whatever. All right. that means that instead of being done in 3 years, maybe we're done in 4.5, 5 years. But I still don't see why, like, no one wants this money. It's money.
Right.
And last time I looked, people want money. And I just don't, I don't
It's
get that.
not like they're just writing you a check. You have to do the work. You have to show up with the right subcontractors. People can't find enough
But wait,
companies
but
to
I'm just talking about a bid. I could make a bid. Then you can tell me, Alvin, there's no way that you could do this. And then I'd say, like, well, at least I put forth a bid. If no one is bidding, there's something wrong.
Well, I think they are. I think you raise a great kind of common sense point, but I think the answer is really that you're making the point that the fact that the contractors aren't bidding is your answer. They are so freaked out, I think, about the uncertainty of the economy and the uncertainty of the cost structure and the supply chain that if they commit to this, they go out of business.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Bill, by the way, enjoy your tie. Does that have a Cinco de Mayo flavor?
Yes, it does. These are Mayan hieroglyphics or whatever the Mayans use. I got it when I was at my brother-in-law's wedding in Oaxaca years ago.
Well, it looks very
They're
sharp.
divorced now, so.
I can remember when we
Mayans. Okay, what now?
Charlie, when we were
That calendar
younger,
ran out.
I just like say, Bill, when we were younger, I can remember that Cinco de Mayo would have had a different impact on the show than it does.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well,
We got
things
little
change.
umbrellas in our
Right, we
cups.
would have. This would have.
I don't know if Martin Dugan would have allowed that.
Oh,
he would not
yes,
have.
he would
He
have.
Well, it's possible during St. Patrick's Day. Let me ask you this, Bill. This week, the 5th person in the United States to be executed in 2022 was executed in Missouri. Carmen Deck, he killed a couple, heinous crime in 1996. And I think a lot of people were in favor of it. I had major reservations, though, because it was pointed out that as a kid he was abused. In fact, he was starved by his mother, who wouldn't give him infant formula. He ended up at the hospital. He ended up in 23 homes before the age of 18. Should a person like this be executed?
Well, I've changed my mind on that. I was a state's witness at 3 executions, and I thought, hey, if somebody does something really terrible and we're certain they did it, execution is all right. And I've changed my mind, and I no longer support executions. I think life without parole, and it ought to be, like it is without parole. So I'm no longer in favor of the death penalty.
I'm kind of like the opposite. When I was younger, but really younger, I mean, teens and whatnot, I was staunchly against the death penalty. And as I grew older, not much older, into my 20s, I said, like, no, people do things that deservedly, I think, you should get the death penalty. I know that there's problems with it, and it's unfair in many ways. We're going to have one come up now. There's a young man from Kirkwood killed a police officer, I think in 2005 it was, and he got the death penalty. And then a white young man killed a police officer, and Bob McCullough didn't even seek the death penalty. That's one of those instances where it's like, okay, explain to me what the differences are. But with that being said, you can do things, and I think that if a jury says you should get it, I just can't stand in the way of it. And maybe,
No, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm with Bill. I was for the death penalty before I was against it, and then I think I was for it again, and then I was against it. I'm not sure. It's Thursday. I'm not. No, I mean I've gone back and forth on this, and I'm with Bill in that we just can't get it right. We can't. I suspect if you said you had to have a death penalty, would this be the case you would do it? It's not a particularly sympathetic case, but I think when you look at the number of DNA cases where DNA has exonerated people where we got the wrong person, which by the way also means that the real killer, as they say, was loose, which is a huge issue. I just think that I just don't think we can get it right. And if you can't get it right for everyone, you can't you can't get it right. You can't do it for anyone.
Well, the last time I was a state's witness at an execution. I was going down there to meet Father Kabat, Carl Kabat, who would get arrested at every execution. And he got arrested at this one, and I went in to witness the execution, and I thought, Father Kabat might be onto something. And not that there's even a question of guilt, usually. But you know, if you have a really slick lawyer, the chances are you're not going to get it. There's just a lot of, and like you were saying with Carmen Deck, heinous crime, should never breathe free air again. But I'm no longer in favor of it.
Very well. Let me ask you, Sarah, as we switch topics here, the city of St. Louis has a measure which would not allow the homeless to have tents on right-of-ways like streets, sidewalks, and alleys. I don't know if that's legally okay, because around the country, that's what homeless are basically doing, and they're, I think, within their rights in most cases. But what do you think about this measure, which would, you know, basically say if you don't live there, you can't have a tent on the city sidewalk?
I think there's a real push-pull right now at the Board of Aldermen. There's a progressive wing that is trying to liberalize how the city deals with its homeless residents, and I think this is the backlash to that. You've got basically an even split on that board, and so you've got your less progressive but still Democrat members of the Board of Aldermen who are saying, we don't want this in our ward, we don't want this on our sidewalks. You know, there's a camp down by the River de Pere. This is like in the far southwestern part of the city. They're not so used to having camps down there. They don't like it. It'll be interesting to see if this thing can get past the full board. It did, you know, it managed to get the support it wanted in committee, but everybody who came in favor of testifying in favor of this measure that would basically ban the homeless from these public thoroughfares were all opposed. There's a very large vocal contingency in this city opposed to it. Yeah, and while I know a lot of people support criminalizing this, those people didn't show up.
You know, in Austin, Texas, very liberal place, where my son lives, it went on the ballot whether they should roust the homeless from the public parks. And in very liberal Austin, the people voted yes, roust the people, because they felt like they couldn't use the parks anymore.
Well, isn't it, okay, if you do that, maybe the thinking is that it spurs communities, city government, state to actually do something.
But I think we know, I mean, I used to live in Los Angeles, it doesn't spur people. People just have nowhere to go. And the problem we have
No, not spur people, but
well, spur governments.
Spur government. Like, listen, we have got to find some
governments have not dealt with this anywhere, even in the bluest cities, in the bluest states. And in St. Louis right now, we do not have enough shelter beds for everybody who wants them. The mayor has said that she believes that we do, but from talking to people in the provider community, it's very clear that we don't.
Peter and Paul in Soulard is starting an effort to get out from the church basement, you know, where their shelter is in St. Peter and Paul Church, and find a new location and have more beds and more programs. And so, I mean, people recognize that we got to do something.
Well, it's also interesting in a world where we're all polarized and everybody's a part on every issue. This isn't about really a philosophy. I mean, in other words, everybody's philosophy, whatever it's liberal, conservative, whatever, is over here. And the reality of when it's in their neighborhood or their home is suddenly there's never an issue that has a bigger gulf between what people stand for and what they will stand for in their own neighborhood.
That is so true. Well, Bill, I want to ask you about the locks at the jail. Dan Isom, the interim public safety director for the city of St. Louis, had a walkthrough today, took members of the media through the City Justice Center in downtown, and pointed out that the locks in one section now operate properly. $7 million job. They're going to move to other quadrants of the jail, and it'll cost $20 million. Do you feel like the city's on the right road here?
Well, they absolutely have to have working locks at the jail. I mean, that goes without saying. I thought that Dan Isom is a little too much of a press agent these days when he was saying, you know, that we're after decades of neglect. And I thought, well, the place was built in 2002. So depending on when they first went in there, it might not even have hit decades yet. It might just be 19 years. So I thought, you know, and nobody, well, I don't think many people are blaming Tashara Jones for this, but maybe they are.
Well, I think there is a movement in the city that Tashara has to deal with, that there are people who consider themselves abolitionists. And by that, they say they don't want any more money to go into the carceral systems. They don't want money going into jails. And she said she wanted to spend more money on social services and not on jails. So she has to answer to that. I think, you know, some of the unrest at the jails, some of the bad things that were happening to people who were staying there made clear she had to spend some money on this. We do need locks on those jails. But she has a constituency that would not support this additional investment. They would say, we need fewer people in our jails, let them go. Let them wait for their day in court.
Well, I know she campaigned on closing the workhouse, and now we've got poor Dan Isom calling it the annex. You know, because we can't call it the workhouse anymore.
Stop these attacks on my friend Dan Isom.
It's not attacks.
Oh,
right?
yes, these are personal vicious attacks. These personal vicious attacks.
No, but Sarah's point's interesting because she says that the mayor doesn't want to spend money, but the mayor lost money by not taking the federal money for the federal detainees. And I think the mayor made the situation worse for detainees who live in the St. Louis area, many of them in the city of St. Louis, because now they're in places like Kentucky and the far reaches of Indiana and Illinois because these federal detainees are not welcome locally. And their lawyers can't visit them, their families can't visit them, and the city's not getting the money. So they'd be much better off at the annex or the workhouse.
Well, I don't know that because then it was overcrowded and then there was riots and all that. No, that could have been.
But that was downtown.
All right, we're just saying that they got all kind of problems. Okay, so if some people had to go to Kentucky or whatever, it is jail. Okay, all right. Not that people don't have rights. All right, and then like we were saying, like there's some constituents that say like they just want to just like let the people go. But I guess these same constituents are saying like, no, we want to let the ones go that are seeking a college education or something like that. Because you say like, hey, look, we're just gonna throw the doors open and let everybody out. People in St. Louis would say like, oh, absolutely not. It's kind of like the homeless. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I want them out, but I don't want them out here.
It's
right?
exactly. It's exactly. I was just going to say that. It's exactly.
You know, when houses are for sale, in your neighborhood, and they have that lock on it where, the only person can get it is a realtor. I don't think those cost $20 million. I don't get that part.
They need more elaborate locks here. But let's face it, all the people in the City Justice Center and in the annex, the former workhouse, these are people who are waiting for trial. And the feds have their system where you basically get to go home and they check in with you constantly and you have to wear an ankle bracelet, but you get to go home. And people are saying, why can't we do this on the circuit court level as well?
I don't know.
Because some of them shoot when they have an ankle bracelet.
Well,
that's why.
It speaks to how it's, as you said, it's just like homelessness, where some of these problems you wonder why anybody runs for office. And and I want to be clear, I am pro-lock. When it comes to the prison, I just am. It's one of my conservative positions, pro-lock, when it comes to prisons. But I think that I don't know what to think of the forces you're talking about, because take it to the extreme. It can be a cousin of defund the police, meaning, what about the poor people that in the neighborhoods when these folks get out, if they are dangerous? On the other hand, I do think we've had a habit of incarcerating too many people that did not need incarceration. We've criminalized mental health instead of treating it. And so I'm generally sympathetic to the idea of that you can just keep...
That's what some people said about one Antione Miller,
Charlie,
who got out and he ended up shooting his 65-year-old neighbor.
You can't look at every example like this and say that there is a legitimate concern that we incarcerate, we criminalize poverty and mental health.
Well, let me ask you, Alvin, about another law and order topic. Apparently, after April 11th, when there was a disciplinary panel that, as Bill McClellan said, threw the pamphlet at Kim Gardner for her misconduct while prosecuting then-Governor Eric Greitens, on the next day, April 12th, 7 grand jurors who had indicted William Donald Tisby, the assistant prosecutor or special prosecutor with Kim Gardner, the circuit attorney, they wrote this letter to Judge Rex Burleson, and they said, hey, we think it's terrible that that the disciplinary panel is not tough enough on Kim Gardner after her misconduct. They called the decision by the panel reprehensible, and they called their own efforts a waste of time and energy. What'd you make of this?
Well, my first thought was that there was at least one person on the grand jury that wanted to speak about the Ferguson situation and said Bob McCullough, threw the case so that the police officer would not be charged, and he was threatened with going to jail. Open your mouth, speak anymore, and you'll be going to jail, okay? Where was this all at? All right? I don't think anybody filed any freedom of information or anything like that trying to find out what he said, but, you're going to trash out Kim Gardner. And also, I wish I knew this, and I don't. I don't know how many people sit on a grand jury because I do believe it's more than 12. So this might not even be half of the people that were impaneled. So I'm taking that with this is some Kim Gardner hate. Not a big fan of her, but I like
You're so right. And the other thing is these people do not have the qualifications, nor do any of us really, to weigh in on the rather high-level questions within the legal system of what sort of discipline the Supreme Court or the OCD.
You're so wrong again.
Excuse me. The OCD made the chief disciplinarian came to an agreement with Kim Gardner. Okay. This is about when you talk about misconduct. The jurors are not lawyers. They have no reason to know.
Ray, these are the people who heard the case. I mean, these are citizens who heard the case. To say they have no standing because they're not lawyers.
They've heard one side of the case from a special prosecutor. This would be like if Ken Starr made his case against Bill Clinton. We never heard anything from the other side. We're in a locked room. It's like, is Bill Clinton a bad guy? Well, I guess those jurors are probably going to assume he is.
Yeah.
That's how a grand jury works. That's why ham sandwiches get indicted.
This isn't just a jury. This is a grand jury.
I tend to agree with the unqualified grand jurors that it was a very light penalty, because I think it's very serious for a prosecutor to knowingly withhold information in a case. Ray, I do.
I know you do.
As much as I dislike Eric Greitens, I think he deserves a fair trial.
I'll say this. I think the grand jury was right. The grand jurors were right about one thing. It was a waste of time. The entire process in a case that was dismissed, that was really a challenge was completely
it wasn't dismissed for that reason.
It was a
I want to tell you something. These grand jurors spent like a year on this, and it started 4 years ago. They ended their work 3 years ago. So that was a lot of time they took out of their lives. And then they found out that when Kim Gardner had interviewed KS, and they said, "Where's your notes?" Oh, she didn't hand over any notes. She said you didn't have them. She did have notes. When they asked Donald Tisby.
Hold it.
No, this is all part of the.
No, I understand all that, but we're just talking about this letter. Okay, I'm impaneled on a grand jury, which decides whether to indict somebody. So we vote to indict them. All right. Then the jury lets them walk right on out the door. Not guilty. You don't hear the grand jury saying like, "What a travesty of justice, man." They got on with their lives. They're like, "Okay, whatever."
That's why this is
nobody wastes their time.
Unprecedented.
No, nobody,
because no grand jury's ever written a letter like this that I know of.
They don't have standing to do it.
What do we take from this?
Exactly. They were there, man. They were there when they saw the evidence.
I heard her explain this to you. They only heard one side. It'd be one thing if the jurors, I guess, came forward and said, "We sat through, 4 weeks of this trial, and even then, they don't really have the."
Well, do you think jurors should be able to decide guilt or innocence?
Yes, I do.
They're sitting in there, and they're not lawyers.
No one's arguing about the jury.
You are.
No, I'm not. The issue before the Supreme Court has to do with the Brady rule and all the technicalism. I don't accept your assumption
I
that
think they
Kim
saw more
Gardner
than
did
the
something
disciplinary
so
panel did.
Yeah, but now also a judge. Hey, look, I can be on a 12-person jury, vote somebody guilty, and a judge could say like, "Y'all got it wrong. This is wrong. Bye."
In the interest of time, let's move to Sarah on Chambers Road. The Post-Dispatch had a piece this week showing that in a recent 5-year period, 2017 to 2021, Sarah, the deaths there were quadruple of the previous 5-year period, including 10 pedestrians. The traffic is crazy there. A lot of this occurred after 2015. Was there some sort of Michael Brown effect where law enforcement wasn't pulling people over? What do you think?
I think it's possible there was, but I think the bigger problem in St. Louis is that our infrastructure is built for a city that is much bigger than what we are right now. And I've read up on this from the experts, and what they say is if a road looks like a highway to people, if there's no one on it and it's like 6 lanes, you get the visual cues that you can go 80 miles an hour, and no amount of enforcement is going to fully solve that. What you need is to change the infrastructure so there's curb cuts and things that slow people down and suggest this is a road where you need to pay attention.
Well, let me disagree respectfully, Sarah. Because the municipalities in North County are forbidden to collect more than this amount in traffic costs and are not supposed to be stopping people and finding out there's a warrant, and this was one of the Ferguson after effects, and well thought out, I thought at the time. Although now, if the police can't stop people for speeding, people are going to speed. And the idea that what we need to do is narrow the roads or put cuts in the roads. I think if we had law enforcement where if it says 40 miles an hour and somebody goes 60, they get a ticket, that would be a start.
Your hometown of Chicago, like once you get at the downtown area, they got big bumps in the road everywhere. They just say like, we're not gonna have it. So, you know, you could do that on Chambers Road. And I think it's a reach to say that people are getting run over by cars because of the Ferguson effect, because the police don't stop people.
And
all I gotta say,
The police say in the story in the paper, the police were saying, we can't stop. We're not supposed to be doing traffic stops.
I think I would say
Well,
that too. If somebody came to me and said like, hey, it's your fault people are getting ran over. Well, it's because I can't stop
My
people.
hands are tied.
I don't remember. I don't recall the Ferguson report saying that you cannot stop people for speeding.
Is there not
It was
a
Senate
law?
Bill 5.
Is there not a law
It
now
doesn't say
that
you can't stop them. It just says you can't excess fine them.
You can't. Yeah,
Well,
there's
well,
issues.
if you
the
can't
issues,
find them, Sarah,
no. Well,
what's the point?
Well, because you can still stop the bad guy. You can charge him with a
You know
crime.
what also happens is once a year there's the Attorney General's report that shows the race of people who are pulled over, and cities get dinged if certain motorists
But nobody does anything about it. The same
That's
report
true,
comes
that's
out
true.
every year.
I know,
and nothing
but
happens.
cities don't want that. But the
Oh,
thing
they
is,
don't want
right
that.
now,
How about penalizing them?
you got to admit, more people than ever before are driving not only with expired tags, with no licenses at
And
all.
people are speeding on 44 like it's
Yes,
crazy.
but
But nobody's getting run over.
The
I was
they are,
amazed
though.
when Alderman Vaccaro was stopped.
But the Ferguson
That was amazing.
report is about using the police as a revenue generator
Right, and they
discriminate.
can't do that.
But you can still stop people for speeding. It's just you can't monetize it.
Oh, okay,
but
well, what do you do if you stop them from
you
speeding?
charge them with a crime and they have to go to court.
But that's not happening,
But they
apparently.
can't be fined if they
So
can't
what?
be fined.
Okay.
Well, so
All
you're
right.
saying police
That's
only...
it for the first segment of our program. We do want to find out what people had to say about last week's show, so let's go to the old mailbag. My family was recently in town from New York, attempted to get tickets for the Arch by 9 a.m. during the week. It was sold out. This is the second time we've experienced this, so I'm surprised to hear that people aren't riding it enough. That from Peggy Orr of St. Louis. Went to Arch yesterday, wanted to bring a friend in town for business, got there at 5:15. It was sold out. That from Pamela Stevens of St. Louis. And we heard from our next writer. Oh, Barbara Bauer. I'm writing to thank you for having the vaccination topic with Dr. Kinch. It was most informative. My daughter is writing a persuasive speech for her high school public speaking class, and she chose the topic of vaccinations and why they're important. Thank you, Barbara. You can write us care of KETC 9PBS 36 Olive Street, 3655 Olive Street 63108. We love those emails and those tweets. Use that hashtag DonnybrookSTL and listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and Google Play. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Sarah Fenske for sitting in for Wendy Weiss. But don't touch that dial. In a moment, two local attorneys, Beavis Schock and Nina McDonald, will talk about the Supreme Court draft that was leaked this week concerning Roe versus Wade. Alvin and Ray will be heading up that discussion next.